Good morning and welcome to another video insight from Hendy Consulting, the management consulting provider to the display industry, the $150 billion flat panel display industry. Well, today, if you're following this link, you've probably just seen my initial remarks on the incredibly provocative presentation that Dr. Choi from Samsung SDC just gave us on the future of his business. And certainly I will reference in those remarks. And so that you can go and view that video separately, but we will recap a little bit about that. But the aim of this presentation this morning is to recap the top 4 display businesses in the flat panel industry as it stands in 2022. The display industry is actually very fragmented with probably 30 players in total, but the top 4 of them represent probably 60% of revenue and capacity. And in that manner, any general manager in the industry needs to take very seriously the top 4 players. So let's talk about them, talk about how they behave in business, talk about their market strategies and technology strengths, so that if you are in sourcing, or if you're doing a technology collaboration, or if you have something new to bring to the market and you're looking at one of these 4 to be a technology partner, then you know what they might be interested in and how they may behave. So let us first recap. There are 4 major players at the top of the leadership board in the $150 to $160 billion FPD industry. In Korea, there is Samsung Display, and Dr. Choi is the CEO and president of that company, and they are the leader in RGB OLED panels for smartphones, with a revenue of about $25 to $30 billion. They've been on the whole more profitable than most of the others through OLED, and they have a 85% plus market share in Flex OLED for brands like Apple and their own parent Samsung brand. LG Display in Korea is the Korean number 2, and they hold the number 1 market position in OLEDs for television based on a decade-old product that is called White OLED, which still leads the category leadership for LGD, but more recently has come into competition now with SDC's newly launched technology, which is called QD OLED. In China, there are 2 players, and these are BOE, Beijing Oriental, and China Star, or Huaxing in Chinese. BOE is very large and has now the highest revenue and highest capacity in the industry by far, and they have been pursuing most display technologies, and their behaviors have moved commensurately from a firm coming up the ranks and now into a leadership position. And China Star is one of the most pragmatic and frankly interesting of the players in the industry, and certainly from a strategist point of view, I've always loved their market strategy. So I won't recap all of Dr. Choi's remarks, but they are incredibly provocative because they talk about emissive displays moving to $100 billion within a reasonable timeline. And moreover than that, SDC's own revenues moving to $50 billion, which would be, fully 1/3 of the revenues of the whole industry. And so that's an incredibly provocative set of remarks. And in a separate video, we actually critique whether or not we think that that's achievable. And I think we would say it's a stretch, but with a few more ideas and some inter-business transfers, maybe that can be achieved. But it's certainly not an easy feat. SDC is certainly a business to be very seriously considered as being probably the best innovator in the display industry. So again, what are we going to do is we're going to talk about the 4 leading chess pieces, 2 Chinese and 2 Koreans. And what makes them important is their role in both revenue and capacity across the board. And more than that, I actually think I would argue to say those 4 companies actually represent a pretty large share of total industry innovation. Specifically in terms of those players that could introduce a fundamentally new technology. I certainly would say that Sharp, JOLED and Tianma deserve their rights to also be on the key innovators list, but really the top 4 are very, very important. But they are distinctly different. So BOE is by far the industry capacity leader. They bought up 2 factories in the last downturn, and from CEC Panda, and put themselves squarely at the top of the capacity leadership board in LCD. They also have a phenomenal Flex OLED business in terms of capacity, but the revenue only beginning to show some signs of moving. The true innovators, I would argue, still remain the 2 Koreans. And China Star has also shown some real, with their parent company TCL, some real capability at innovation, with particularly their work on QDEL and inkjet printing of OLEDs. So what we're going to plan to do, just to give you a profile and a sense of all of these four players, is to talk about each one of the four companies, their capacity and technology strengths, their swap profile, and that's only because this is a simple to understand framework for looking at each one of the four, their technical interests, and then how they behave. What might it look like if you were planning to go and do a joint venture or a partnership or sell to them as a customer? How would you expect them to behave, and how might you want to treat them? So SDC, we have talked about them. They are by far the leader in the small panel OLED industry, with a large amount of Gen 6 capacity. It started at Gen 5.5 and then moved into Gen 6 capacity for OLED for both Apple and for the Samsung brand. They are technologically extremely competent and have really shown an ability to deliver completely new ecosystems. And of late, there's two important things for us to talk about. First is QD-OLED, which is their new TV technology, which actually uses color conversion on the front plane using quantum dots to give a better color space and brighter display than the LGD white OLED. And that, from all of my friends and colleagues that have seen it, is an amazing display. But also the most recent breakthrough is work with Ulvac on a Gen 8 vertical fine metal mask OLED fab. Now, this is something that's been a decade-long project or more of industrial policy in Korea and R&D in trying to scale OLED into something close on Gen 8. And there are a lot of issues to be solved, not in the least the fine metal mask strain. But supposedly now Ulvac with Samsung has solved this. And what it does do is it potentially changes the cost position of some IT products using OLED. Now, OLED for notebooks and for tablets has typically been less than 5% of the units shipment, typically less than 3%. And the change in the cost will be one more element that might choose to see some forward-looking adoption of OLEDs in the IT category going forward. So this is important because it brings a new category of revenue to the display industry. And so this is really, I wanted to put this in some perspective. The graph on the left is the capex plot of total industry capex in the display industry going back to the year 2000. And the green bars are ones where you've got numbers more than 10 billion spending a year. And as you can see, there was the very large flex peak from 2016 to 2020 shown there, when everybody piled in to try and serve predominantly Apple for flex OLEDs. Right. Now, the key thing here is this new Gen 8 fine metal mask OLED capacity could enable a new bubble of capacity in the same way. So you basically have to talk about 5% of perceived demand shifting to OLED. That given that players overbuild capacity, there are three leaders and they all want to serve this new demand. Because there's overbuilding, that leads to each 5% is 15 billion of industry capex. So it really is important and will change the shape of the industry going forward. So let's talk a little bit more about SDC. I mean, fundamentally, they are the leader in OLED displays for smartphone. They really built that category with all of the work on fine metal mask, recent work on the Y-Octa touch panel, and they're working hard at functional integration, of which Dr Choi now talks about doing fingerprint sensing across the whole display surface as one of the things, they call it all-in-one sensing, that he plans for the future. The QD-OLED work has been category breaking, and also the parent company has been working on micro-LED in a product called The Wall. So these are the sorts of things that Samsung as a group thinks are really important. When we talk about Apple and Samsung, I always call Samsung the pragmatist, because they're fundamentally fascinated by how things can be done at an innovation level. And that also gives you insights as to their future direction. They will be interested in new equipment approaches. They are interested in process changes. They are interested in inorganic materials fairly fundamentally, so have a fairly strong interest in mini and micro LEDs. they have been really interested in colour space and colour space innovation, and they've also been really fascinated by the fold type idea or different form factors in devices. So these are all things that Samsung stands for, and SDC should be the primary starting point for all of these ideas. SDC, however, then is the 85% market share leader in the OLED space for smartphones. And all you can say is if you start with that sort of market share position, it's very difficult to maintain that sort of category leadership in the face of competition. Now, Flex OLED is a quite difficult product, and the Chinese have actually shown that it's actually quite difficult to follow. And so SDC's main aim has been to use process innovation to make it harder and harder for the Chinese to follow what it is they do. So SDC, key strengths. Now, clearly the Flex OLED business has to be one of them. And we've talked a little bit about that. The QD OLED launch, which was this year in 2022, really sets the standard for what a display should look like as a OLED for television. And it will be fascinating to see how much Samsung ramps capacity for this. I certainly would expect them now to try and want to catch up with LGD in terms of capacity in this space. So some aggressive fab building is something we might expect. Now this slide talks about QNED, but that's a technology that's actually been cancelled in the meantime. They are also the category leader by far in pushing forward the foldable space and all of what's needed to put that in place in terms of flexible layers, TFT structures, processing, new materials and the like. So really, this shows off really one of the true strengths of SDC. And finally, it's worth talking about the fact that SDC has actually exited LCD now completely. And that really makes them an OLED pure play and makes them a fascinating business from a corporate strategy perspective. So how do they behave? Well, I always call SDC the gorilla of the display industry. They are the most innovative and they have market power and they know it. And dealing with them is always challenging. I always say to startup CEOs that you have to think very carefully when dealing with SDC, but they will take technology risk. And that's what makes them really important. If you have a new piece of equipment or a new material that's associated with equipment and you need someone to drive this forward, then SDC is more than likely going to be the person that's interested in doing so. And so it becomes a sort of important path for a large number of startup CEOs. Now let's talk about my friends at LG Display in Korea. So they are the industry number 2. What makes them distinctly different, and I would say they have the same fundamental innovation capability that Samsung has, but they've built up market leadership position in the OLED for television space. Here we call it white OLED, WOLED, but LGD has a substantial amount of capacity, so more than 7 times the capacity of Samsung in OLED television. They are well ahead. They certainly know how to manage this business and the IGZO backplane technology that goes with it over a decade. And so this will be an interesting competitive battle between the two, but we should never discount the strength of LGD in the market. One of LGD's core strengths is a key relationship with Apple, and they've worked together over 2 decades. And as a merchant player in Korea, where the parent brand is not so strong, where there's less channel conflict for Apple, and so certainly LGD and Apple's relationship is important. Clearly, LGD also has a lot to say when it talks about the television business, and they are also a truly amazing leader. Their Flex OLED business is actually quite a bit weaker, and that's possibly worth saying. And from a corporate strategy point of view, other than the partnership with Philips that I was involved in 20 years ago, they have been much less inclined to use M&A as a corporate strategy in taking their business forward. So what would we say that were LGD's real strengths? Well, the white OLED business, for one, where they have category leadership, is certainly important. They also ran a long way with the IPS pixel structure from Hitachi and built up a very strong IPS LCD business across segments based on that. They're also the only player that's actually shown, although they may not be selling that many, rollable televisions. So that's an area of use. And really, I would point also to their fundamental understanding of oxide semiconductors, where I do believe the industry has a real need for IGZO-based semiconductors as a middle performance semiconductor for emissive displays. LGD truly here is one of the leaders. So how would I characterize LGD? I think I've shown them here as the lone wolf, and that's really just a reflection of their market strength, but also that they tend to do things on their own. They're very close to Apple, and they can collaborate. So certainly some players find them easier to deal with than SDC, but they're probably somewhat less inclined to do so. So they do have an open innovation system, and I would encourage people to engage with LGD. They're certainly in some ways easier to deal with than Samsung, but you know, in general, they have done less partnering than others. Now let's talk about the two Chinese, and you know, it goes without saying that BOE is by far the most important player here on the table, and they're now the industry number one revenue-wise and capacity-wise, and they have a huge number of factories. Just look at that list across China. In the LCD business, but also in the Flex OLED business. They've yet to make a fundamental decision on a large panel emissive technology, but they are very strong in LCD and probably the industry number 2 or number 3 in Flex OLED. So they certainly have some strengths. One of the challenges may be that they're built up as a set of different city joint ventures with different towns around China, and that in itself a little bit of a challenge in terms of their structure. They are big. They are very big, and they have actually tried to pursue most display technologies, which means if you want to talk to someone who has probably looked at your technology, then BOE may be them. However, they've got a bit of a reputation of being a little difficult and bureaucratic to deal with, and that's partially a reflection of their governance structure with all these different ventures with different city governments in China, but also because they're distributed around China, and factory managers and leaders seem to have quite a large say also in what goes on in their space. So BOE is large and vanilla covers the whole space, but they do have some particular strengths. They have their own version of the IPS LCD liquid crystal structure. They are also arguably the number 2 or number 3 Flex OLED player. Certainly in terms of capacity, they would be number 2, but in terms of revenue, they may well lag on LGD. They have real interest in some sort of play in large panel emissives and have shown large white OLED displays at shows, but no, as far as I know, no factory investment decision yet on following Samsung and LG into large panel emissives. But they do have real interest also in micro LED, and as such, BOE would be important for people to talk to if they're interested in that space. Now here, the only one way I could think of showing BOE is as this huge elephant, and I think it shows their speed, their size, their importance in the industry, and it gives you some ideas of what they might be like to deal with. Now, China Star is finally, of the 4 we're going to talk about, China Star. They are the industry number 2 in China, based in Shenzhen, with a smaller number of fabs, but to me a very tight operating strategy. From a strategy point of view, I've always thought that they did one of the best in terms of making very careful decisions and differentiated decisions compared to others. And so they have a pretty solid LCD business, and they are now differentiating by really trying to innovate in QDEL, so emissive quantum dots, and in RGB OLED through printing based on collaboration with JOLED in Japan. So this is actually important innovation agenda. They also have a real interest in mini LEDs and have supported that in line with their parent company TCL, that's really led the mini LED category. They've done a lot of work on inkjet printing and QDEL, and I'd actually expect them to get there fairly quickly in Flex OLED, given they have started putting in place Gen 6 capacity, and you'd expect them to catch up quite quickly because they are such a solid player. They also have quite a good small panel business across LCD and OLED, and that makes them interesting. So here I show them as a Chinese tiger, and that's just I think they really show the potential to be an industry leader from an innovation perspective. They're making differentiated decisions and they execute very well. And certainly I think they're a very interesting company. Now, finally, as we begin to wrap up, and I've done a fairly quick tour of the top four in the industry, it's worth saying they're really different. These four players are very different market positions, and I'll let you study the table. Let's move me out of the way. STC is the category leader in Flex OLED, and they are now moving into the large panel emissive space with their QD OLED product. They are clearly one of the best in the industry at innovation. LGD then is still in LCD and is the category leader in large panel white OLED category, with the same capability to pull off fundamental new technologies. BOE and CSOT then are much more LCD focused, although BOE has a large Flex OLED business too in terms of capacity, just not yet in terms of sales. And certainly both of them have innovation capability that's actually going up the list. And the joy of the display industry is that there's very little central road mapping. So understanding the four players really comes down to deep dive understanding of their interests by studying them over more than 2 decades. So certainly if general managers or entrepreneurs want to approach me about talking about their technology and who would be interested, I think it's very clear that the four companies have very differentially different interests in terms of technologies. So these are the interests in some of the innovations of the industry of today from LGD and Samsung. And we can do the same for BOE and China Star. And I think all it's important to say is that they all have different things they consider to be important. And this is one of the reasons we work with entrepreneurial businesses in trying to help them with their customer strategy in terms of engaging with the right player and working out how much value is created and then how to share that value. Because if you go to the company that's the most interested, you weight the chances of success in your favour. So this is our overview of the top four in the display industry. We hope you've enjoyed this. I hope for those of you that are sourcing professionals, perhaps for the automotive industry, which we haven't touched so much, it still gives you an idea of the four major companies in the industry and give you a sense of how they might behave. We work largely with startup and equipment and materials CEOs on helping them develop their market strategies, and so then understanding how to approach, who to approach, and how they might engage becomes really important. But we have done a very broad range of both functional offerings and market projects covering a whole range of different technology areas, and certainly I think this is where Hendy Consulting stands up really well. We've looked at a large range of technology and market issues across the industry, with quite a number of levers in terms of things that we can bring to the table. So certainly if there's any interest in anything we've said, we would ask you to reach out. And we're really now orienting our business around 2 fundamental offerings. The first one is a retainer-based service for display general managers in terms of reducing risk by helping you confirm that you've made the right decision or reorienting your decisions around success. And it's about having a friend in the industry that can help you check your market strategy and your competitive position, your business model and your pricing. And one of the things we often find is that people leave money on the table, and certainly we can often work with people to help you understand how that can be changed and improved. And the other thing we've also worked on is breakthrough growth ideas. So we bring to the table our experience of more than 2 decades in this business to try and help you be more successful and provide for perhaps exit opportunities, but also JDA opportunities. And the other type of business that's really important to us has been around market entry strategy or key investment decisions. So whether it's building a new factory for a new technology or entering the display market with a new material or a new piece of equipment, or if you're a display startup itself, this is something that's bread and butter for us, and we take on these projects to help you be successful at market entry in what is otherwise quite a confusing marketplace. Thank you very much for your attention today.